Welcome to The Details with Adam Froer and Cecil Walker. This is a podcast where we examine the intersection between solution-focused brief therapy and current topics happening in the world. And we do this because we genuinely want the world to be a better place. So enjoy and examine the details with us. So, Cecil, today we're going to talk about a landmark court case that happened where the Supreme Court in the United States essentially overturned Roe versus Wade that made getting an abortion an inherent right that anyone had access to. And recently, that decision was overturned by a new Supreme Court, and therefore possible and probably very likely that the access to abortion will be significantly limited. Already, some states have put into action a complete ban on abortion. And we both live in the state of Georgia, and they recently passed what they call the heartbeat bill. So if a heartbeat can be detected, abortion is no longer a viable option. And so we're going to talk about this very divisive content and say off the top, we're probably not going to hold back much. We're going to say what we think and why we think it. So if you had to explain why this topic is relevant for this podcast, how would you explain that?
Well, first thing that immediately comes to mind about why this is relevant to this podcast, to us and our conversations and the work that we do, is we deal with people, right? People are our job, specifically the betterment of people's lives and the well-being of people's lives. And I think that's very much at the heart of this political discussion is this hindering the well-being of some people's lives? Is this subtracting from how freely and healthily people can live their lives? So I think it's an extremely relevant topic, but I think also if you are to do the work that we do in the fullest extent and in the best way possible, you're automatically juxtaposing what's at the heart of the decision that the Supreme Court came to. I think it'd be really, really hard to see people in the way that we see people and give them the room and the grace and the autonomy and all these things, and simultaneously say we need to remove the right to choice to an abortion given different specific contexts.
Yeah, I think some really important words that you used in there that are kind of the hallmarks of solution-focused brief therapy. One is autonomy, right? We oftentimes talk about how we begin a session by saying to people, what are your best hopes? And that's a way of honoring, what do you want? What is good for you? What is right for you? And throughout the entire conversation, we say, we cannot veer from their desired outcome, their best hopes. We say we are completely bound as professionals, mental health professionals, to only involve ourselves in their lives in so much that they invite us into their lives. They invite us to talk about certain aspects of their lives, and they leave other aspects of their lives off the table simply by not addressing them. And it's our responsibility to follow their lead in some sense about what is okay to talk about, what isn't okay to talk about. And by doing that, we honor their autonomy. We even go so far as to say, we don't want to violate their autonomy by giving suggestions, by giving homework assignments, even by complimenting them, right? If I compliment someone in a therapeutic setting, in some sense, I'm saying this is what I value about you, and it supersedes what you value about you.
Yeah.
And I think autonomy is such a fundamental premise of what it is that we do and how we do it, that to see the Supreme Court, in some sense, take away autonomy from at least half of our population, it's really jarring that we've gotten to a place where autonomy isn't valued as a human right.
And I'm glad you use that terminology too. Plainly say that it is a human right. That is something that all people should be entitled to simply for existing, is this sense of autonomy. I can make choices about myself and my life as I need to. And I think if we were to talk on the topic of rights as it relates to this abortion, we'd find ourselves getting into a bunch of different rights. The right to privacy, I think, is very much at the heart of this. How do you regulate who is getting illegal medical procedures. The only way to know that is for the state to have knowledge and access to your private medical information and to the discussions that's going on with your doctor and to what's going on inside of your body. I also think that it gets into the rights of every individual having a right to the best healthcare that they could have. An abortion is a medical procedure, and in some instances, it's really, really necessary for some people. It could save their life. It could give the best possible medical outcome for those involved. So to remove that as an option completely says that what could be life-saving or helpful in a medical sense is no longer available to you. And I think that's a denial of rights as well.
Yeah, I think oftentimes, and I want to be really conscientious here because I know that a lot of people will disagree with the stance
Certainly.
that we're taking, right? And some of the feedback from the other side is that there is a moral obligation to protect that unborn child. There is a religious obligation to protect, oftentimes the phrasing is the sanctity of life.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be really clear here. We're in no way trying to denigrate the sanctity of life.
Mm-hmm.
We are in no way saying that we want babies to die. I don't think anybody is making that argument.
I would agree.
But I think that one of the things that we hold to, which I think most religions would also get online with, is people have the ability to choose. Mm-hmm. And I know that some people will say, well, choice was made prior to this experience, and so now people are held accountable for this experience. But I think that one of the things that you're highlighting that's really, really important is that we don't know what's going on for a person in the particular moment of time. They may have made one choice and it leads to several other outcomes, but they're at a different pivotal choice moment. And we don't know what's going on for that person that gets to determine how they make this particular choice, right? You mentioned health might be one of those factors. But again, we deal with people in our jobs, and we deal with people who have been raped. We deal with people who have been trafficked. We deal with people who are in incest situations. And there's lots of places where choice was violated that put someone in this situation. And I think to only look at pregnancy was a choice or not a choice, you really overlook nuances that happen. But regardless of that, when you look at this particular moment of choice, we don't know all of the factors for anyone. And to jump in and to say, well, the government has the right to dictate what everyone's decision needs to be in that particular moment, I think is an overstretch of responsibilities of their role. Mm-hmm. Because we deal with the individual nuances of people, we've dealt with lots of people who have been in the moment of decision-making around, should I have an abortion or should I not have an abortion? I've never encountered anyone who's at that moment who hasn't been full of anguish about what this decision entails. And I personally would hate for the government to tell me what decision I needed to make in a moment of anguish, because they have no idea how I got to that moment or what it means from this moment forward.
I'm glad you make all of those disclaimers, because I think what's necessary in this conversation is to really humanize who is going to be the object of the consequences of these political decisions. These are just people. These are ordinary people. There's nothing particularly evil or bad about these people. And there's maybe not even nothing particularly amazing about these people, that they're, some saints that need to be exalted in some way. In our work, we have to see people just as they are. They're people. People do the best they can on most occasions. Sometimes they make mistakes, but for the most part, nobody's trying to willfully cause, extreme harm to other people. No one's trying to kill babies, like you said. That is quite an anomaly that someone would be so willfully violent and disregarding of life. And I think it's maybe easy to forget that really, really human component to it. And it's easy to forget to try to see these individuals like this, that these are people with feelings and deeply complex experiences who are having to make very, very hard decisions. This is not throwing away a pair of shoes or something. This is a very consequential life decision. I've never seen anyone make it very easily or lightly.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you were getting at too is the dehumanization that happens. I think we have experienced laws before that inherently dehumanize people.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery was a legal operational system that was sanctioned by the government that dehumanized an entire group of people, right? That got carried through in lots of civil rights laws, right? The Jim Crow laws said we can treat people inherently differently, and that's a sanctioned thing by the government. We think about lots of access to healthcare. We think about access to the rights to marry, all of those kinds of things. There have been laws that limit, that dehumanize who these people are. And I think this is an example of a law that now is in place that dehumanizes a whole group of people. And I think that's inherently wrong.
Yeah.
I think the other component is also something that you identified is kind of that vilification, right? That we tend to, when we think that we're on the right side of the argument, we tend to vilify the people on the other side of the argument. And I think oftentimes the people who get hurt in this situation are the women who are in this situation. They're getting vilified, and oftentimes they are in their most anguished situation. And now they're met with additional vilification, additional dehumanization. And I think there's nothing that we could do that's more harmful to them than to treat them as the worst humans that exist on the planet.
Yeah, it's really layering on the implicit consequences. There's obviously going to be very explicit consequences, but then there's this internal strife that goes on with these kinds of decisions as well. I really like your language around humanizing that needs to happen. I hadn't really thought of it in this specific term till just now in this conversation, but that does seem to mark what I see as being a sign of social progress, or even a sign of really good and meaningful human interactions, is when it's humanizing others. All of the social movements that we see that are trying to make social progress are simply trying to humanize the groups of people who have been dehumanized. They've had their humanization taken away. And then even on a micro level of when you're interacting with another person, the things that you do that humanize them, I think are very significant, meaningful things. In our work, when we say, what are your best hopes? What is it that you want from this process? Let me hear from you about what you want. That's very humanizing. When you're at the grocery store and you're talking to the clerk at the cashier and you ask about their day and you ask them meaningful, personal questions that elicit a real non-robotic response, that's humanizing. All of these things feel like these are very good things for people. These are good things for social integrity. And the things that do the opposite are very plain to me that they're not good for social integrity. They're not good for social progress. Anything that takes those things away. And I think that brings us back to the human rights stuff that we're talking about. Anything that violates a right that is naturally given to human beings simply for being human beings, that's dehumanizing and I think explicitly wrong.
Yeah. I think this also gets us to kind of that bigger social context of, so if we held to people have the right to choose, autonomy is a fundamental principle that we can't violate. So then what do we do? Then how else do we solve a problem that is a big social issue, right? And I think that's where we get to the idea of humanization carries through in so many ways, right? We provide people with really good education, right? We say, this is what life is like, and this is how you protect yourself, and this is how you stay safe. And we provide really state-of-the-art healthcare, right? If you think about who's really going to be impacted by this decision, it's going to be people who are already disenfranchised, people who are poor, people who are in poverty, people who don't have access to other forms of healthcare, right? I've seen so many people on social media say, companies are saying, we'll travel for you to go somewhere else to get the care that you need. And so people who have insurance, people who work for these certain companies, people who have personal finances, it's not going to change their decisions or their behavior. What's going to happen is people who are disenfranchised, who are already dehumanized in other ways, they're going to be further dehumanized. They're going to be further vilified. So we provide really state-of-the-art healthcare to anyone who needs it. We provide care to people who are perpetuating violence. Many of the people who are in this situation are in this situation because they've been abused, or they've been neglected, or they've been raped, or we need to intervene in those systems. And we need to hold people accountable, but we also need to provide other means by which they can get their needs met so that this isn't the outcome. We need to hold people accountable. Right now, we're saying we need to hold these women accountable for their choices. And in some sense, we need to hold men who are behind this accountable for their actions, but not just throw them in prison. We need to educate them. We need to provide for their needs. We need to come up with viable jobs for these people. We need so many social issues. We need to be invested. If we are pro-life, we need to be invested in the lives of the people who are already in this situation and prevent future people from being in these situations.
Yeah, that's the part that makes me a bit confused, is if we're all on board with life is valuable and that we want to make sure that life thrives and that people are able to have the lives that they should have, wouldn't that mean we would invest in those things, right? Like life is so important. So let's make life good for these people who have difficulties getting to that. Let's even decrease the chances that there might be an unwanted pregnancy, or not even talking about just the election of having an abortion for the sake of not wanting the pregnancy, but let's also decrease the chances of medical complications that also tend to require the need for an abortion or some similar process. And those things, just like you described, look like investing in education, investing in accessible healthcare for everyone, regardless of employment or socioeconomic status. There is a huge correlation, a very concrete correlation between abortion and crime. When you take away this kind of choice for people, it increases the crime rates quite drastically. And of course, crime tends to perpetuate people being stuck in, the prison industrial complex and the socioeconomic status that led to their crime in the first place. And so now there's a cycle of abortion being constantly needed and necessary as an option. So if everyone is able to say we care about life and we want the greatest quality of life and to preserve life, I think that's what that looks like, is doing these things.
Yeah. I think this intersection of valuing humanness, viewing people as valuable, that changes our behavior, it changes our policies, but it also increases autonomy, right? When we view people as capable humans, we trust their decision-making. When we provide them with resources that expand possibilities, they have the option to use autonomy wisely. And I think anytime we're moving to restricting versus allowing for autonomy, we're getting to be on shaky ground.
Yeah, absolutely. This podcast is sponsored by the Solution Focused Universe, a global community dedicated to the growth of professionals who want to master the solution-focused approach. The SFU is home to the world's largest library of solution-focused material, which is updated on a monthly basis. Join fellow community members and solution-focused leaders in coaching calls and private Facebook groups to discuss anything and everything related to solution-focused brief therapy.